Melissa pounded on the front door, her door, only it wasn't hers anymore. Her mother had sold the house, quietly, legally, without her. The place she called her future was now someone else's past. No goodbye, no warning, just a locked box and a silent deed. Online, the comments turned. Her followers demanded answers. And 3 towns away, Helen Callahan, her mother, sipped tea, blocked the call, and finally exhaled. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The applause came half a second too late, like everyone was pretending they'd been paying attention all along. Helen Callahan stood frozen just past the patio doors, one hand still on the handle of the screen, watching her daughter lean in over the cake, a 3-tier ombre monstrosity of pinks and purples, and extinguish all 69 candles in a single dramatic exhale. Laughter rippled across the backyard. Not joyful, nervous, social. "Guess Mom needs help now, huh?" Melissa said with a smile that never touched her eyes. She straightened, flipping her sleek blonde hair over her shoulder, then raised her glass. "To the woman who taught me that aging gracefully means giving up carbs, control, and apparently, your taste in music." A few guests chuckled. One man coughed into his wine. Helen stepped onto the grass slowly, heels sinking slightly into the earth, her breath tightening in her chest like she'd forgotten how to arrive in her own life. The white tent flapped gently in the late May breeze. Beneath it, rented tables dressed in gold linens, crystal champagne flutes, catered hors d'oeuvres Helen couldn't pronounce. Nothing familiar, not one yellow rose, her favorite, no Billie Holiday drifting through the Bluetooth speakers, just some top 40 playlist Melissa had probably curated herself. A guest in a linen jumpsuit turned and gave her a little wave. "Oh, there she is, the birthday girl." Helen gave a polite nod. Her cheeks ached from the practice smile she'd been wearing since 3 p.m. when the setup crew had arrived. She hadn't been allowed to help. Melissa had hired a vision planner. The vision, apparently, was a version of her birthday party in which she was a ghost. Melissa clinked her glass again. We all know Mom's got 9 lives, 70's around the corner, and she still refuses to use reading glasses. Denial is the real skincare secret, huh? That one got a few louder laughs. A couple people glanced toward Helen, gauging her reaction. She simply smoothed her blouse, soft cream silk, something Melissa had insisted was age-appropriate, and kept walking. The cake's icing shimmered under the fairy lights, pristine and untouched. Melissa had even cut the first slice herself. The candle wax still smoked faintly. Helen's throat burned with something sharp and unnameable. Not anger, not quite. She drifted to the edge of the lawn, next to the buffet table, where the shrimp sat under polished silver domes. Her eyes swept over the crowd, mostly Melissa's friends, a few scattered family members, no one from Helen's book club or the quilting group she'd once tried to start. They hadn't been invited. She hadn't been asked, and yet she'd paid for every chair, every drink, every designer canapé. Melissa was now snapping selfies with the cake, her lips pursed into a kissy smile. Helen stared at the flickering sparklers melting in the grass beside the cake table. She heard a laugh, Melissa's fake laugh, the high-pitched one she used in boardrooms and baby showers. The sound made Helen's stomach twist. Flashback, there'd been a time, another birthday, another life, when Helen stayed up until 3 a.m., stringing paper lanterns in the garage for Melissa's sweet 16. She'd made cupcakes from scratch, folded napkins into roses, and rented a karaoke machine from a guy named Randy who operated out of a bowling alley. Melissa had smiled then. A real smile. A child's smile. Helen blinked it away. That girl didn't exist anymore. She moved toward a small cluster of guests near the mimosa bar, intending to say hello to thank them for coming. She opened her mouth. "Mom!" Melissa hissed, intercepting her. Her lips barely moved as she leaned in. "Don't hover. You should be grateful you're even invited." Helen's breath caught. The words landed with the soft impact of a thrown pillow, but inside, something cracked. She stared at her daughter. Up close, Melissa's contour makeup gave her the bone structure of someone else entirely. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, full of something like resentment or victory. "I see." Helen said quietly. Melissa turned away before she could answer. Helen stood there a moment longer. Then, without a word, she pivoted on the spot, walked past the tent, past the bartender adjusting bottles on a mirrored tray, past the rented rose arch. The car keys felt foreign in her hand, like they belonged to a different woman. Once inside her Camry, she sat in the driver's seat for several. She moved toward a small cluster of guests near the mimosa bar, intending to say hello, to thank them for coming. She opened her mouth. "Mom," Melissa hissed, intercepting her. Her lips barely moved as she leaned in. "Don't hover. You should be grateful you're even invited." Helen's breath caught. The words landed with the soft impact of a thrown pillow, but inside, something cracked. She stared at her daughter. Up close, Melissa's contour makeup gave her the bone structure of someone else entirely. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, full of something like resentment or victory. "I see," Helen said quietly. Melissa turned away before she could answer. Helen stood there a moment longer. Then, without a word, she pivoted on the spot, walked past the tent, past the bartender adjusting bottles on a mirrored tray, past the rented rose arch. The car keys felt foreign in her hand, like they belonged to a different woman. Once inside her Camry, she sat in the driver's seat for several seconds, the throb of the music from the party still faint through the rolled-up windows. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She reached into her purse. Tucked inside her wallet, beneath her lipstick and the valet stub, was a long white envelope, thick, weighted. She pulled it out. Her fingers hovered over the seal. The deed, still signed in her name, still notarized, still hers. Helen closed her purse with a soft, deliberate click. She started the engine and drove away. The living room was silent except for the slow tick of the wall clock above the fireplace. Helen sat at the edge of her couch, her back straight, as if someone might still be watching, though the only company was a half-drunk glass of Pinot and the faint scent of lavender from the plug-in diffuser Melissa insisted was more modern than candles. She banged on the front door of her childhood home, her inheritance, only to find the locks changed and a sold sign sinking into the front lawn. Inside, her mother didn't move, just stood still in the hallway, watching. "Mom? What did you do?" Melissa's voice cracked. The escrow had closed. The trust was airtight. The house, no longer hers. Not a warning. Not a goodbye. Just a handwritten note taped to the glass. This time, I kept something for myself. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The floor above me vibrated with laughter. Forks scraped plates. Christmas music danced through the ceiling like a cruel lullaby. I lay curled on a flattened air mattress, the fleece blanket barely covering my knees. I could smell the honey-baked ham from here, so close I could taste the salt in the air, but I wasn't invited to the table. I wasn't even upstairs. Jenna said it was for my own safety, that I got confused too easily now. Then she and Brent locked me in the basement like some old ornament they didn't want to hang but couldn't quite throw away. The lights down here flickered like they remembered better days. The air was thick with mildew, dust, and something faintly sweet, cinnamon potpourri maybe, from a Christmas box tucked in the corner. A plastic tray sat on the washing machine, one dinner roll, a slice of ham with congealed fat, and some peas that had gone rubbery. They didn't even warm it up. I sat up slowly, bones protesting like furniture being moved for the first time in years. My breath fogged in the cold. I counted the decorations stacked around me. Ceramic reindeer, a chipped nativity scene, a dozen broken snow globes from a time when Jenna still made me macaroni art and called me Mama. Above me, I heard someone say, "She's just not feeling well. Went down to Florida to rest." It was my granddaughter, Emmy. Lying came easy to her now. I imagined the smile on her face while she said it, practiced and smooth. I reached for the wall and found the string to the hanging light bulb. When it clicked on, it illuminated what I hadn't noticed before. A cardboard filing box half sunken beneath a stack of old winter coats. The kind of box you never open unless you're desperate or dying. Inside were envelopes, faded, tabbed, labeled in my handwriting. Mortgage, 1994 through present. Refinance, 2010 2016, equity line, denied, 2018. I thumbed through them with hands that knew every fold. These papers had once meant safety, survival, a roof over Jenna's head, the one I fought for after Charles died. I remembered working double shifts at the school just to cover the second mortgage. That was the year Jenna wrecked her car and lied about the insurance. I paid off the balance anyway. Flashback, 8 months ago. "I just want to make sure you're protected, Mom," Jenna had said, sliding the paperwork across the kitchen table. "If anything happens to you, Brent and I can make the decisions you'd want." The words co-ownership had been dressed up in lavender legalese. The guilt hit like a belt across the spine. I'd missed her birthday that year, forgotten to send a check. She reminded me of that during lunch. "I trust you," I'd whispered, and I signed. Back in the basement, I unfolded one of the newer documents. A notice, quarterly mortgage adjustment, interest-only payments. Something looked wrong. I held it to the light. They weren't paying the full note, not even close. My name was still printed on this copy, but it was absent from the payment section. Brent had adjusted the terms. It looked like a sleight of hand, but I'd taught accounting. I could read the spaces between the numbers. A tremor rose in my gut. Not fear, something hotter, denser. I ran my finger along the bolded line at the bottom, the one that caught my eye first. Authorized payment holder, Brent Holloway. They were pretending I didn't exist, and worse, they thought I wouldn't notice. I stared at the boxed-in clause with a growing chill in my chest. Then I whispered, "They're not even paying the full note." And the party upstairs carried on, clinking glasses over my head like dirt shoveling into a grave. I kept my breathing shallow, quiet, like I had in childbirth. Back then, I was bringing life into the world. Now, I was trying to keep mine from slipping into someone else's hands. I sat on the cot they'd laid out for me in the corner of the basement, beneath a crooked box of angel ornaments and a stack of old wrapping paper rolls. Upstairs, Brent's heavy boots thudded across the ceiling, followed by Jenna's sugar-sweet laughter as she waved off a guest. "She's in Florida," I heard her say through the floor vent. "She hates the cold." What I hated was being locked underground like a forgotten crate of decorations. They thought I didn't hear, Brent especially. He spoke louder around me lately, slower too, as if I were some half-senile child. But I wasn't deaf, not even close. And that's how I caught them. 2 weeks ago, just beyond the kitchen hallway, whispering to their broker on speakerphone. "I think she's close to, memory loss. We should get the house listed before the new year," Brent said. Jenna had nodded, scraping her fork across her plate like it was an afterthought. "She signed partial ownership over already. If we stage it right, no one will question anything." Partial ownership. The phrase still made my stomach turn. I gave it to them, out of guilt. After my stroke scare last spring, I was afraid of leaving Jenna with nothing but stress. She cried at the hospital, told me she didn't want to fight over things after I was gone. I was tired, foggy, scared of dying. I signed. They called it just paperwork, a backup, a precaution. Funny how fast precautions become prison bars. Tonight I stayed quiet as Brent passed the basement door. I held the metal tray they'd left me. Cold turkey slices, store-brand green beans, and one of those dry dinner rolls that need 3 chews before you can swallow. Beside it sat a bottle of off-brand water and a folded napkin, like I was a damn guest in my own house. I heard the door open, not the basement one, the side door, then a faint voice, accented and kind. "Trash out back." Then I go, "Okay, cleaning lady." Maria. I moved fast, silent as old ghosts, slipped on my slippers, hugged the shadows. The side door clicked closed behind her but didn't lock. God bless the ones who still leave kindness behind them. I pushed it open and felt December slap me across the face. The cold nearly buckled my knees, but I didn't stop. I walked, shaky but upright, past hedges lit with string lights I paid for, down the sidewalk, over the salted driveway. 4 blocks later, I rang Nancy's doorbell with a knuckle that wouldn't stop shaking. Nancy answered in her bathrobe, mascara smudged under her eyes. "Irene?" Her voice cracked like glass under pressure. "Jesus Christ, get in here!" The warmth of her kitchen hit me like a memory. apple cider, clean laundry, and real human dignity. She pulled out a chair, handed me a blanket, and poured coffee into a mug with a chip on the rim. "I'm going to kill them," she muttered, sliding her cell phone to me. "Start wherever you want." I nodded and unlocked my bank app. The loading circles spun, then froze. My name wasn't there. Not as primary, not as secondary. Nowhere. The mortgage account listed only Jenna and Brent. My heart didn't race. It dropped. Like it knew falling was safer than exploding. I turned the phone around to show Nancy. She stared. "What the hell?" "They erased me," I whispered. No one heard me scream in that basement. But in Nancy's kitchen, I didn't need to scream. I was finally wide awake. I wasn't shaking anymore. By the next morning, Nancy's dining table was buried under decades of my life. Manila folders, tax envelopes, spiral-bound mortgage disclosures, even a few yellowed receipts with my late husband's signature still etched in fading ink. "You always kept everything," Nancy said, handing me a second cup of coffee. "Never understood it till now." I smiled faintly. "Being an accountant for 30 years makes you paranoid." More than that, it made me precise. And Brent, bless his smug little heart, had always laughed about my file cabinet fetish. What he didn't know was that I'd built a second one in my head, and now I was sorting. I arranged every folder by year, cross-referenced tax returns with 1099s, refinance notices, and utilities. Everything before March looked fine. That was when I went into the hospital. Stroke scare. 4 days in ICU. And somehow, somewhere in that window, my house changed hands. We drove to the county recorder's office in silence. Snow crunched under Nancy's tires as the car heater chugged out a lukewarm wheeze. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed like angry insects above the linoleum floor. The clerk at the front counter scanned my ID and typed in my address, then she froze, tilted the screen slightly toward herself, and leaned in. "Huh," she murmured. "That sound always means bad news." "Deed was reassigned March 12th, she said, "notarized under medical proxy. You weren't the signer." My heart did something strange. It didn't break. It stilled, like it was waiting for me to do something smart before beating again. "That's when I was in the hospital," I said. "Sedated." Nancy's face turned a red I hadn't seen since the time a local handyman overcharged her for roof work and she chased him down with a broom. Back in the car, she pulled out her phone. "You remember Dana Mullins? Title clerk from the old days? She quit after a buyout but still freelances on the side. Let me call her." Dana agreed to meet that afternoon. She arrived at Nancy's house with a scarf tied tight around her throat, an overstuffed briefcase, and a no-nonsense face that could slice through drywall. I laid out the paperwork like evidence in a murder trial. Dana reviewed it all slowly, flipping pages with the care of a bomb tech. When she reached the deed transfer, she paused. "This signature doesn't match any on your earlier documents," she said, tapping the line labeled Irene Walker. "This was rushed. Maybe copied." Nancy leaned in. "You think it's forged?" Dana didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out a penlight and studied the notary stamp. "That notary closed their license 3 months before this was filed." Bingo. I leaned back, letting the heat of the room press into my chest. A long-forgotten lecture flickered through my mind. Me in a stuffy community college classroom, using fake bank statements to teach freshmen about forensic accounting. I used to tell them, paper never lies, but people do. That night, I opened the last drawer in the box I'd carried from the basement. Tucked between an old Valentine's card and my husband's funeral program was the document I didn't realize I still had. Charles's original will. Dated, witnessed, ironclad. And in it, the house was mine. Solely, completely, forever. I blinked hard, then laid it next to the forged deed like a before and after shot of betrayal. Dana rubbed her chin. "You're not just a victim here, Irene." I looked up. "You're still a legal co-owner." I wore the same navy wool coat Charles bought me for our 30th anniversary. I liked the weight of it. It reminded me that armor doesn't always clang when you walk. The bank's lobby smelled like fresh carpet glue and insincere holiday candles. A cheerful wreath drooped on the glass door as I stepped in. The receptionist barely looked up when I said I had a 10:15 appointment with a mortgage representative. She tapped her keyboard and gestured toward a padded chair. When I said my name, the typing stopped. The banker, Mr. Elliot, 40-ish, bald, smug, greeted me like I was a walk-in with a savings account question. He offered coffee, smiled too long. Then I handed him my ID, social security card, and the original joint property deed Dana had verified. When he glanced down at my paperwork, the smile wilted. "I'm here regarding a mortgage fraud concern," I said evenly. "The property's been refinanced using my equity, without my consent." He blinked. "That's quite an accusation." "I'm not accusing, I'm reporting." I opened my planner, flipped to a page I'd marked with a paperclip, and pulled out printed screenshots of the online account showing my name had been removed. "Would you like my passwords too? Or the authorization history from my device?" I kept those just in case someone got creative. He no longer smiled. He stood. The next 30 minutes happened in a glass-walled office where other employees began sneaking glances through the partitions. Mr. Elliot called a compliance officer. A second screen was pulled up, transactions reviewed, documents scanned. The farther they went, the deeper their silence got. "This account," he finally said, tapping the screen, "shows a refinance approved with e-signatures, but no physical backup. One name signed, not yours." I leaned in. "You think my thumb twitched itself onto that iPad while I was sedated in the ICU?" He didn't answer. Instead, he asked if I'd like to file an official fraud request. I already had the form filled out. All I needed was his pen. When I walked out, the bank had frozen the mortgage account pending investigation. No payments could be made, no liens adjusted, no ownership transferred. The ride, as Brent liked to call it, had just stopped cold. That evening, I sat at Nancy's kitchen counter with a bowl of canned soup and a folder marked Trust Draft. Inside was a list of accounts I'd opened under a legal trust name I'd created years ago, back when I still taught night classes and feared the IRS more than my own daughter. I'd named the trust after my grandmother, Edna Bell. She taught me that nothing says strength like a woman who can control her own money. Using a burner laptop Sadie loaned me, she was Nancy's niece and a lawyer with a taste for justice, I began moving small funds into Edna's account. It wasn't a fortune, but it was safe, and it was mine. Later, while organizing my papers, I found a photo tucked inside my old budgeting workbook. Jenna, at 12, sitting at the kitchen table, brows furrowed, pencil in hand. I'd made her do the checkbook by hand for a month before she got a debit card. "I'm teaching you to read numbers like a second language," I'd told her. She never forgot how. She just forgot who taught her. My phone buzzed. It was Sadie. "I'm in," she said. "You've got a case, but there's only one chance to cancel this mortgage from the inside out." I stayed quiet. "I mean it," she continued. "We have one shot to nullify the mortgage. Are you ready to detonate it?" I looked at the photo again, then up at the window where the snow had begun to fall in sheets. "Yes," I said. "Light the fuse." The bank's legal liaison handed me the final form with latex gloves, and a neutral smile, like we were signing over the rights to a donated kidney. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of a frosted wall clock and the buzz of a heater trying its best against Ohio winter. "Just your signature here, Ms. Walker," she said, flipping the page. I signed with the same pen I used on Jenna's birth certificate. Same name, different battlefield. It was called a revocation of consent, buried deep in the homeowner rights clause. Because the refinance had been filed under my equity I never consented to, the bank had to formally cancel the mortgage agreement while they investigated further fraud. The wheels of bureaucracy turned slow, but they turned harder when you dropped legal ice in the gears. I handed the envelope back. "Send it express, and email them too. I want them to feel it before dinner." She nodded. "We'll notify both parties this afternoon." Both parties. How generous. By evening, Brent and Jenna's panic was practically humming through the neighborhood group chat. I hadn't even posted a word, and yet someone on the cul-de-sac shared that the house was now in legal dispute status. A red flag went up on the mortgage record, another on the county title. Foreclosure watch had been activated like a siren no one could silence. Nancy poured bourbon into her hot cocoa as we watched the ripple effects. You ever throw a snowball so perfect it cracks a windshield? She asked, raising her mug. Better, I said. This one's gonna total the damn car. 2 days later, I went back to the house. I knew their schedule. Brent was at the gym pretending he had biceps, and Jenna was at her lash appointment pretending she had a soul. I used the spare key hidden behind the third brick in the front walkway. They'd never changed it. The air inside smelled like cinnamon brooms and entitlement. I moved fast, straight to the fireplace mantel. There it was, my wedding ring, tucked into the tiny porcelain bowl Charles and I bought on our honeymoon. They'd left it out like a trinket, a relic of someone who no longer mattered. I slid it onto my finger, still fit. A floor creaked behind me. My heart froze. Grandma? I turned slowly. It was Claire, my granddaughter. 17, baby-faced but guarded, standing at the foot of the stairs in socked feet and a hoodie too big for her. I thought you were in Florida, she said, blinking like she wasn't sure I was real. I heard that lie from the basement, I said softly. You're smarter than they think. You knew. She nodded, tearful. They said you were just confused. But then I found your planner in the donation bin. You had everything written down, even the mortgage dates. We stood in silence, fireplace between us. You don't have to follow their footprints, I told her. You can start over. Her lip trembled. I don't want to become them. You won't, I said. Not if you choose better. She ran up and hugged me before I could brace for it. Her arms were cold. Her tears were warm. I left through the back door before Brent's truck pulled in. I didn't need another scene. I'd already stolen the spotlight where it counted. Later that night, Nancy answered her door with a manila envelope in hand. It's from the county, she said, holding it like a bomb. I peeled it open with a paring knife. Petition for full guardianship. Brent and Jenna had filed it last week, claiming I was mentally unfit, prone to delusion, unable to manage personal affairs. The hearing was in 14 days. Nancy read it over my shoulder, her hand trembling in fury. They want to own you, she said. I folded the document calmly. Then we give them something else to hold. The next day, I starts prepping for the guardianship trial. The petition spelled it out in black ink and sharp cruelty. Cognitive decline, questionable memory, emotionally unstable. Jenna didn't even sign it with hesitation. Her signature looped like a ribbon on a birthday gift, like she was proud to wrap me up and ship me off. Nancy slammed her hand on the kitchen counter. This is war, and you don't go to war without armor. Enter Sadie Brooks, a 30-something firebrand of an elder law attorney with steel in her voice and soft curls that didn't budge when she turned her head too fast. She took one look at the petition and said, "They really thought this would hold up. I taught accounting for 27 years, I said. I still balance my checkbook with a pencil and a straight spine. Then let's show the court that spine." Sadie worked pro bono, said it was her holiday act of resistance. We spent hours compiling medical records, a clean cognitive screening from last month, prescription logs, even my tax filings for the year. All neat, complete, and prepared by me. Not a caregiver, not a nurse, me. Meanwhile, Brent and Jenna made their media rounds like two twisted saints. A local morning show aired a segment titled "Family Fights to Save Elderly Mother from Herself." Jenna wore soft beige and spoke in concerned tones about my episodes and disoriented conversations. Brent rubbed his eyes like tears were forming but forgot to actually cry. Nancy nearly broke her remote, hurling it at the screen. "Episodes," she barked. "The only episode I've seen is them treating you like expired milk." I stayed quiet, but I was already recording. Every day I sat by the window and filmed myself, discussing my plans, reading headlines, reciting poems I memorized in 1971, describing what I cooked, who I called, why I still paid my bills. It wasn't performance. It was preservation. They wanted a story about decline. I was giving the world a documentary about defiance. Then Nancy hit pay dirt. She was cleaning out an old voicemail inbox, one Brent and Jenna forgot she had access to, from when Jenna asked her to help out with Mom's meds. Most of it was spam, but one message was clear as crystal daggers. Jenna's voice, laughing. "Basement brains probably rearranging Christmas lights in her head. We'll have the paperwork through before she even finds the damn doorknob." Nancy didn't speak after she played it, just pressed her phone to her heart like it might explode. I leaned forward. "Can you email that to Sadie?" She nodded slowly. "I already did." That night, I sat at the dining table and stared at a framed photo of Jenna when she was 8, wearing butterfly clips, smiling over a half-burned gingerbread house we made together. I used to believe love would insulate you from this kind of betrayal. Now I knew better. Love softens, but it doesn't shield. The next morning, I checked my email and found a new message flagged confidential, bank archives enclosed. The subject line, requested transaction history. Attached was an encrypted zip file from a clerk I hadn't spoken to. I clicked the link. A message popped up. "Ms. Walker, this was left in Brent's shared folder. You might want to open it before he deletes it for good." The encrypted file loaded slow, like it knew the weight it carried. Folder after folder popped open, buried beneath months of digital dust. At the center, labeled Home Equity Bundle, Drafts, was a scanned PDF titled FCL Agreement, Brent Signatory. I clicked. Page 1 hit like a truck. Loan amount, $112,000. Borrower, Irene Walker. Purpose, home renovation, consolidation, safety modifications. Lender, River Valley Mortgage Partners. Date filed April 2nd, 2 weeks after my hospital stay. My hands clenched so tight I left nail marks on Nancy's kitchen table. There were no renovations, no safety rails, no widened hallways, no ramps, no updated electrical or upgraded roof, just excuses and silence. I kept scrolling. Brent had typed up an authorization letter signed with my name, only it wasn't my signature. It looked like a child trying to copy cursive off a cereal box. I printed every page. My old Canon wheezed like it was giving CPR to the truth. 42 sheets later, I slid them into a binder with dividers, tabs, and a hand-labeled cover. Exhibit A, lies they filed. Sadie raised her eyebrows when I brought it in. Color-coded? "I taught accounting for 3 decades, I said. "I don't do chaos." She flipped through the pages. "This qualifies. We can counterfile under financial elder abuse. That's felony territory." I nodded, but I was already miles away in memory. Back to the worn recliner by the fireplace where my needles clicked and holiday music crackled through a dusty radio. I used to knit a new sweater every Christmas. Jenna's was always red with gold trim. Brent got navy blue like he mattered. Even the dog had a stocking. I stitched my affection into every loop, thread by thread, and that's what they unraveled. One stitch at a time. A knock at the door broke the quiet. Nancy opened it. My granddaughter Taylor stood there, cheeks pink from the wind. "I saw the news," she whispered. "Mom says you're confused, but you don't look confused." "I'm not," I said. She looked down, twisting her hands. "I want to testify. For you. If I can." My throat tightened. "You sure?" "She lies to everyone. But she doesn't even try with me anymore. That tells me everything." I reached for her hand, rough from the cold. "Thank you, baby. You don't have to fix it all. Just stand in the truth." She nodded, blinking fast. That night, I didn't sleep. I repacked the binder, laid out my court outfit, set an alarm for dawn even though I wouldn't need it. Nerves moved through me like wind through bare trees, restless but still standing. By morning, my spine felt made of iron. Nancy dropped me off in front of the courthouse. Sadie was already there, heels sharp, coat buttoned like armor. "You ready to do this?" she asked. I glanced up at the building. White stone, government-issued sterility. I didn't need it to feel warm. I just needed it to feel just. We climbed the stairs. At the entrance, I paused. My breath caught. Next to the mailroom, where names were listed by hearing dates and courtroom assignments, someone had used a Sharpie to cross mine out. Walker, Irene. Room 2. A single black slash erased it. I turned to Sadie. "They scratched me off." She stared, then clenched her jaw. "Not today, they don't." I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, hands folded neatly over the binder I'd built like armor. Every breath I took tasted like drywall dust and stale carpet glue, but I made myself swallow it down. They were already inside when we arrived, Brent in a too-tight suit, and Jenna in a beige cardigan meant to look motherly. I'd worn navy. It always made me feel like steel. Sadie leaned close and whispered, "They're pushing hard on mental instability. Ready to clear your name?" I nodded. I didn't come this far to whisper. The clerk opened the door and called us in. The courtroom was small, low-ceilinged, with tired fluorescent lights that hummed like a warning. On one side, Brent sat flanked by his attorney, all crossed legs and fake concern. Jenna dabbed at her nose with a tissue, like she'd rehearsed sadness but hadn't figured out sincerity. The judge, a gray-haired woman with a voice like she'd spent years commanding quiet rooms, adjusted her glasses. "We're here for the matter of Walker vs. Walker, guardianship request. Ms. Walker, are you prepared with counsel?" Sadie stood. "Yes, Your Honor. My client is mentally fit, financially capable, and prepared to demonstrate such." Brent's lawyer jumped in. "We'd argue otherwise. Ms. Walker has displayed erratic behavior, delusional accusations, and paranoia regarding her family's intentions. She has a history of strokes, memory issues. She ran her own household until 4 months ago," Sadie snapped, "and will show she was involuntarily confined by the petitioners." The judge lifted a brow. "Proceed." They made their case first. Brent spoke like he was on a talk show, tone soft, palms open. "It's not about taking anything. We just wanted her safe. She was forgetting names, confusing dates. Once she left the stove on for hours." "That was 9 years ago," I muttered under my breath. Jenna chimed in, voice trembling. "We love her. We've seen a decline. We thought guardianship was a kindness." Sadie rose, heels tapping like a countdown. "Your Honor, I submit the following into evidence." She handed over a folder thicker than their story. Medical evaluations from 3 independent doctors, all confirming mental clarity, recorded daily journals, financial records showing active management of her trust, and 1 very thorough presentation. That was my cue. I took the stand. The court swore me in. I stood straight. Not out of pride, but out of spite. I wasn't going to let them make me small again. "I'm Irene Walker. I taught accounting at Tannersville Community College for 28 years. I raised a daughter, buried a husband, paid off a house twice. I may forget where I put my reading glasses, but I've never forgotten how to read the fine print." Brent shifted in his seat. I laid out the fraud like I was back in front of a chalkboard. Timeline, documents, unauthorized loans, forged signatures. They didn't just lock me in a basement, they tried to erase me on paper. The room went still. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Walker, do you have proof of these allegations?" Sadie nodded and handed up the binder. I caught Jenna's face, red now, lips trembling. But it wasn't regret. It was exposure. When I mentioned the $112,000 loan in my name with 0 repairs completed, Jenna slammed her hand on the desk. "She's making this sound worse than it is." The judge raised a hand. "Sit down, Ms. Walker." Jenna stood, furious. "This is a smear campaign." Sadie didn't flinch. "This is accountability." Jenna grabbed her purse and stormed out, muttering to herself as the doors swung shut behind her. A low murmur spread through the courtroom. The judge cleared her throat. "Due to the severity of the accusations and the volume of financial documentation, I am delaying judgment until a full forensic review can be conducted." She eyed Brent. "In the meantime, any financial activity related to Ms. Walker's estate or property is frozen." I nodded once, slowly. The weight of silence settled in again, but this time it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like the sound of a scale tipping back toward justice. 2 days later, the first crack in Brent's perfect empire wasn't loud. It was a withdrawal. A quiet email from his business partner, distancing himself from ongoing legal and ethical concerns tied to the Walker guardianship case. I saw it because Sadie forwarded it to me with a note, "Watch the dominoes fall." And fall they did. By the end of the week, 2 of the real estate agents Brent had been courting for his high-end flip partnership had backed out. Their names vanished from his website. The listings dried up like December leaves, contracts voided before the ink could fully dry. That's what happens when you build wealth on someone else's bones. Eventually, the marrow stops giving. I sat in Nancy's sunroom, legs wrapped in one of her thick crocheted throws, while a man named Ezra flipped through a stack of folders like a priest reading confession. "Forensic accounting," he explained, adjusting his glasses. "It's like a paper crime scene. We dig in, we dust for intent." Ezra had the posture of a librarian but the instincts of a bloodhound. He didn't flinch at the mess. If anything, he leaned in closer. He pointed out the phantom payments, the late fees disguised as maintenance surcharges, the shell business Brent funneled my home equity through. "He's not sloppy," Ezra said, tapping his pen. "He's practiced." "So was I said, sharper than I meant to. "Just not at stealing." By Friday, Brent sent a text. Brent. "Hey Irene, can we talk? Maybe reset things?" We all made mistakes. I stared at it for a full minute, then typed 4 words and hit send. Me. "Your apology can't be direct deposited." He didn't reply. That night, Sadie launched the website for the trust I'd been building, the Anchor Fund, Justice for the Silenced. Within 24 hours, over 6,000 people had clicked the link. Women started sending emails. Some just said, "Me too." Others told stories more twisted than mine. One woman had been evicted from the house she built by her own niece. Nancy scrolled through the messages with wet eyes. "You're not just fighting for yourself anymore." "I never was," I said. The fund became more than money. It became a symbol. Local news picked it up, then regional. Sadie got invited to a podcast. A slow fire had started, and Brent's ego was right in the path of the smoke. That Sunday, Cammie's text came in at 2:14 a.m., just a single screenshot from her college's registrar. "Enrollment revoked due to non-payment." Below it, her message. "I didn't know. I'm so sorry." I sat up in bed, heart pounding, not with anger, but with that hollow kind of grief that feels like falling. Brent had pulled her tuition without warning, cutting her off like she was just another expense to slash in his crumbling budget, and now she was the one paying the price. The same girl who used to leave peppermint candies on my pillow every December, now forced to pack up her dorm in silence. Betrayal has bloodlines, but so does survival. The house wasn't just bricks and siding. It was where Charles and I laid tile with our own hands, where we marked Cammie's height on the pantry door frame in crooked Sharpie. The deed didn't mention the Christmas mornings or the nights we fought and made up before sunrise, but I remembered it all, and I knew now, it wasn't just a house they tried to steal. It was me. I watched our wedding video again that morning, the grainy kind with timestamps in the corner and too much sunlight in the lens. Charles, in that awful powder blue tux he thought looked sharp, turning to wink at me just before we said our vows. His voice, younger, steadier, filled the room. "This house? We'll build it together, piece by piece." And we did. Right down to the mailbox he insisted had to be read. I hit pause. Then I called the auctioneer. The proceeds, I told them, would go directly to the foundation, Restitution and Rise, our new nonprofit supporting women over 60 navigating financial betrayal. Sadie helped file the paperwork, and within a week, we had a case number, a mission statement, and more emails than we could answer. The house would go. I would not. When Jenna got the notice of public auction, she went ballistic. She and Brent filed a lawsuit claiming emotional distress, insisting I'd orchestrated a smear campaign and caused permanent damage to their social reputation. I laughed the kind of laugh that feels like a back crack after a long drive. "You locked your mother in a basement," Sadie said to the local reporter, "and now you want sympathy?" Within 48 hours, my countersuit trended on legal TikTok under the hashtag Grandma Justice. A TV producer asked if I'd appear on a morning segment titled "The Grandma Who Beat the Mortgage Game." I declined the makeup chair but sent in footage of the video testimony I'd recorded during the guardianship mess. My silver roots, my steady voice, and the quiet fire in my eyes said everything. That night, I lit a candle on the porch of Nancy's place and watched the stars spread above me like an open archive. The trust documents were nearly finalized. Sadie had built a bulletproof legacy plan. No child, no spouse, no slick-talking banker could ever overwrite my story again. I was about to go inside when Sadie called. Her voice was clipped, sharp, but humming with energy. "We found something," she said. Turns out, Brent wasn't just greedy. He was sloppy. While combing through archived lending logs from a credit union he once used, Sadie's paralegal flagged a home equity line of credit, opened using 2 signatures. One was Brent's. The other? Charles Walker, she said. My heart stopped. He's been dead for 9 years, I whispered. Exactly, Sadie replied. It's a felony now. My fingers trembled as I opened the scanned form she emailed me. The signature was close, but not right. A homicide Vani. Done with arrogance and a steady pen, thinking no one would check because widows don't question what's already gone. But I wasn't that kind of widow. I stared at the signature until the screen blurred with tears. Not from sadness, from fury. And then, peace. Charles had always warned me. If anything ever happens, don't let your kindness be your weakness. He never meant for that advice to be used against our daughter, but life doesn't ask for clean lines between love and justice. The next morning, Brent had just stepped out of his black SUV in front of their half-finished renovation project when 2 plainclothes agents closed in. One held out a badge, the other held handcuffs. His face dropped before his foot hit the curb. Jenna stood frozen in the passenger seat, mascara streaking as she realized the flash wasn't a photographer. It was a forensic accountant's camera. I watched it all from a bench across the street, sipping lukewarm tea from a styrofoam cup. This is for wire fraud, identity theft, and unlawful use of estate assets, one of the agents said. Clear as a bell. I nearly toasted them. It started 2 weeks earlier. Sadie filed the formal complaint after we uncovered not just the forged equity loan in Charles's name, but 3 separate wire transfers from my accounts, each disguised under labels like roofing deposit and landscaping subsidy. The IRS launched a full audit. The bank followed, and Brent, smug in his khakis and charisma, had left a damning trail. They always do. Jenna naturally shifted faster than a campaign slogan. He did it without my knowledge, she sobbed on local news the next morning, her voice cracking for sympathy. I thought we were just helping Mom. I didn't know it was this. She'd forgotten the voicemail we already turned over, the one where she laughed about my basement brain. The story hit national outlets by Tuesday. Ohio grandmother triggers financial fraud arrest in inheritance battle. They ran my high school staff photo. I wish they'd used the one with Charles back when I wore my silver hair in soft curls and thought loyalty was stronger than law. The house sold within days of the auction listing. $1.3 million. A bidding war, apparently. Location was prime, even if the karma wasn't. I didn't keep a dime. The money went directly into the Restitution and Rise Trust, overseen by a 3-person panel and built to fund legal aid for women over 60 who'd been conned by family. We had our first 5 applicants by Thursday. One had lived in a garage. Another had lost her pension to a son-in-law's crypto scheme. I sent each one a handwritten welcome card. You are not invisible, I wrote in black ink. You are not done. Cammie came to see me the next morning. She was wearing a hoodie from her old college, sleeves pushed past her elbows, eyes heavy from working the night shift at a grocery store just to make rent. I want in, she said simply. In the trust? I asked, confused. In the work, she clarified. What you're building, I want to help. I didn't cry. I didn't hug her. I just pulled out the extra office key and slid it across the table. She tucked it into her sleeve like it belonged there all along. That afternoon, she sorted intake forms with focus I hadn't seen since she was 8, and building tree forts from library books. Her hands shook a little when she typed, but she smiled at every caller. I lit a candle for her that night, lavender and mint, the scent of beginnings. The next morning, there was a letter waiting at the office, no return address, just my name in all caps and a smeared postmark from the county jail. I stared at it for a long time. Brent's handwriting hadn't changed. Loopy R's, aggressive slashes for T's. It looked like it was trying to escape the page. Nancy glanced at me from across the desk. Well? She asked, voice flat but bracing. I didn't answer. I broke the seal. It began with a shaky scrawl and a correction fluid smudge over my last name, like he couldn't even spell it right after all this time. The envelope was thin, just 1 page, maybe 2, folded twice and sealed with prison glue. There was no apology on the outside, just the stink of ego inked in blue ballpoint. "Irene," it began, "I don't know what stories you're telling about me out there, but you always were good at making yourself the victim. Jenna's life is ruined. Mine too. If you'd just let us handle things like family, none of this would have happened. You were impossible to please. Controlling. Cold. I hope you're happy." I read it twice, then again. My hands didn't shake. I'd seen worse handwriting from 8th graders turning in late homework, but there was a line that stopped me, circled in red like it had been rewritten 3 times. "You turned my daughter against me. You always wanted to be the hero. You're a monster, Irene." I clipped it to a corkboard in the office beside an old photo of me, Charles, and baby Jenna at a pumpkin patch, pinned it right above the Restitution and Rise mission statement, because when someone calls you a monster for standing up, frame it. It means they finally saw your power. That night at the Tuesday support circle, I brought the letter in and read it aloud. Every chair filled, women of all ages, all walks of life, divorcees, grandmothers, one woman whose son had drained her retirement to buy NFTs. When I finished reading, there was silence, then laughter. Honest, relieved, belly-deep laughter. "That's not a letter," someone said. "That's a tantrum. You should make it your nonprofit logo," another joked. I tucked it back into my purse and made a mental note. File it under evidence of why we fight. The next morning I got the call. A grant, 6 figures, from the Midwest Foundation for Independent Aging, enough to expand Restitution and Rise into 3 new states. Nancy popped a bottle of cider in the office. Sadie cried happy tears on speakerphone. We had a board meeting within 48 hours. I wore my late husband's cufflinks. Gold. Heavy. Anchor-shaped. A week later, Cammie gave her TEDx talk in Columbus. Her title slide read, "When Family Hurts More Than Strangers, My Story of Protecting the Woman Who Raised Me." She didn't flinch once. Her voice cracked on the final line. "Love is not loyalty if it requires silence." I watched from the front row, hands folded, eyes dry. A part of me wanted to run to her after, hug her, cry into her sweatshirt, say all the things I'd held in, but I didn't. Instead, I waited until she came to me. She pressed her forehead to mine. No words, just legacy folding into legacy. The offers started pouring in. News segments, podcast invites. One university wanted me to lead a seminar on estate ethics and empowerment. I chose the Real Estate Ethics Conference in Chicago. Bigger crowd, more suits, people who needed to hear it most. My talk was titled, "When the Will Isn't Enough, Protecting Homeowners from Family Exploitation." They gave me a standing ovation. One woman followed me out to the lobby, crying into her sleeve. Her sister had forged their father's will. She didn't know where to start. I handed her a business card and said, "Here." That night, back at the hotel, I watched an old home video on my tablet. Charles was behind the camera filming Jenna's 3rd birthday. His voice crackled from the past. "Irene, you were always the anchor. She doesn't know it yet, but you're what's holding this whole ship steady." I didn't cry. I just closed the app and checked my email. Subject line, book proposal, the basement clause. The first line I typed was the one they'd never let me speak out loud. They locked me in the basement for the holidays, so I booked their mortgage cancellation. My fingers didn't shake, not anymore. Each keystroke felt like a brick in a house I was building with no blueprint, just survival instincts, a damn good memory, and rage sharpened into resolve. I wrote at night, mostly, when the house was still and the clock didn't judge. The tone? Raw, bitter, sometimes funny in a way that made my old diary blush. I didn't write it to be liked. I wrote it to be free. I wrote it so no woman who handed over her keys in good faith would ever feel like a fool again. By Chapter 7, I called it The Basement Clause. By Chapter 14, a podcast producer slid into my DMs. By the time I wrote the final paragraph, Netflix had already made their offer. They called it unflinching, uncomfortable, vital. I called it overdue. 3 weeks after the trailer dropped online, a grainy teaser of me walking past a foreclosure sign, my voiceover saying, "I built a life. They tried to stage it for resale." My inbox cracked open like floodgates. Over 2,000 emails, women, men, grandchildren, people who watched it on mute at work, people who cried in parking lots and said, "This happened to my mother." Some wrote in all caps, begging for help. Others just said thank you. I read every one. One woman wrote from Kansas, "I thought I was the only one who didn't get invited to her own will." I forwarded that one to Nancy. She texted back, "There are more of you than there are of them." The foundation exploded. Restitution and Rise went national. We hired 2 more attorneys, a grief counselor, and a graphic designer who turned my quote, "It wasn't revenge, it was record-keeping," into merch that paid for 3 scholarships. I donated 20% of the book deal to adult literacy programs because I knew firsthand how many women signed things they didn't read because they couldn't, and no one told them that love should never come with fine print. Jenna, for her part, went completely dark, deleted every social account. No more lifestyle blog, no more wellness tips for busy moms, just digital dust. Her name was a whisper in algorithm corners tied to lawsuit articles and Reddit threads. At first, I looked. Then I stopped. Disappearing doesn't erase what you've done. It only postpones the day someone pulls up the receipts. Sadie was nominated for an Elder Law Award by the National Bar. I didn't tell her. I let her find out at the gala when they called her name. She cried on stage, holding that heavy glass plaque, said, "This isn't mine, it's Irene's. I just carried the briefcase." We hugged backstage. She asked if I ever felt like forgiving Jenna. I said, "Forgiveness isn't the closing chapter. It's a footnote, if you earn it." Later that night, after the lights dimmed and I'd folded up my speech, I came home to one new voicemail. Cammie's voice, urgent, low, like she'd rehearsed it 5 times before pressing send. "Grandma, it's me. I need to talk to you. There's something I need to tell you about Mom, something I didn't know before. It's important." Cammie sat across from me at Nancy's kitchen table, her hands clenched around a chipped mug of peppermint tea she hadn't touched. Her eyes, so much like Jenna's, but softer, bounced between mine and the table's grain. Her voice came out in pieces. "She started years ago," she said, "long before you had your stroke." I didn't speak. I let the silence stretch, heavy with unsaid things. "She kept a notebook," Cammie continued, "documenting every time you forgot a name, repeated a story, misplaced something. She called it early indicators." Her breath hitched. "I thought it was just for your safety." My hands curled around my own cup, heat pressing into my palms. I didn't drink either. "She switched your medication," Cammie said, voice breaking. "Nothing illegal, I don't think. Just, she told the doctor you were getting forgetful, said you needed anti-anxiety pills. But they made you foggy. She wanted that." My chest rose once, fell slow. "She told me not to worry about it. Said you were happier that way." She looked up then. "But you weren't." Number I hadn't been. I'd been dulled, blurred around the edges. A woman living in soft focus while her life was being Xeroxed and signed away. "She was planning the guardianship for almost a year," Cammie whispered. "And she used me too. Every time I texted you something she didn't like, she'd guilt me about family unity. I didn't even see what was happening." I reached across the table, covered her shaking fingers with mine. "You saw now. That's what matters." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. I never wanted to be like her, and now I know I don't have to be. That night, I sat with my lawyer and revised my will again. Jenna's name disappeared with one clean stroke of a pen. I didn't hesitate. Not this time. No loopholes. No residuals. Cammie's name was added, partial executor of the foundation, with full rights to carry it forward. Not as a replacement daughter, as herself. I watched her sign beside mine, hand steady. "You trust me with this?" she asked. I smiled. "You earned it." The next morning, I pulled an old storage bin from Nancy's garage. Inside, tucked between sweater patterns and holiday tins, was a manila envelope labeled Final Orders, the guardianship paperwork. I didn't read it again. I didn't need to. We took it outside. The snow had melted just enough to expose the edge of Nancy's fire pit. Cammie lit the first match. I dropped the papers in, watched them curl, blacken, and vanish into ash. I thought I'd feel rage, vindication, but what I felt was lighter. Done, I said simply. We spent the next 2 days packing. Vermont waited, a rented cabin, no cell signal, no press, no Brent, no Jenna, just a wood stove, 2 beds, and air that didn't carry judgment. On the drive there, Cammy brought up a memory. You remember that summer I couldn't balance on my bike? You refused training wheels, I chuckled. Said they were for kids who didn't believe in themselves. I fell so many times, and I told you to get back up. Every time. She smiled. You whispered, "You're stronger than you think." You remember that? Of course I do. We reached the cabin by dusk, frost brushing the windows, pine scent thick in the air. The fireplace creaked like an old friend waking up. We unpacked in comfortable silence, moving like we'd done this before in another life. In the bedroom, I opened a dresser drawer looking for extra socks, and stopped. There it was, a white envelope yellowed at the corners addressed in my late husband's handwriting. To Irene. If you're reading this, you already survived what I feared most. My breath caught. My fingers trembled. My hands trembled as I broke the wax seal, brittle with age, and slid Charles's letter from its envelope. His handwriting tilted slightly to the left, looping in a way I hadn't seen since before the stroke that took him. It smelled faintly of pine and dust, like time had preserved it under layers of winter air. If you're reading this, you already survived what I feared most. I sat on the edge of the bed, snow tapping softly against the window-like fingers hesitant to interrupt. Cammy stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, gaze lowered in reverence. I knew something in Jenna was hungry for control, too much like my own mother maybe, but I also knew you'd never let her take you without a fight. A short, involuntary laugh escaped me, small and broken like ice cracking on a pond. If she ever turns on you, don't waste time trying to make her understand. You were always the strong one. I just held the flashlight while you built the path. There was no formal goodbye, just that final nudge, that last piece of faith, the clause he'd never written into his will, but had tucked instead into the pages of our real life, one I was now free to turn. Later that week, I stood in a podcast studio in Montpellier. The host asked for a reading from the book, and I chose page 212, where I described the first night in the basement. I didn't read it with bitterness. I read it with precision, with earned weight, the kind that could only come from walking through fire barefoot and then paving the road for others to cross safely. You wrote about pain without letting it become your voice, the host said afterward. How? I had to, I told her. Otherwise, they'd own not just the house, but the story. The episode trended for 3 days straight. By Friday, the inbox of my nonprofit had 11,000 new emails. Some from lawyers, some from daughters, most from women like me, tired, silenced, and looking for the exit door that didn't come with a price tag or an apology. Sadie filed something that same week, a proposal in the state legislature called the Basement Clause Act, designed to make it illegal to file for guardianship without a physical wellness exam and a financial conflict audit. She sent me the draft with a sticky note that read, "This started with a side door left unlocked. I hung the bill draft on my office corkboard right next to my wedding photo and the first draft of my memoir, coffee stains and all. That spring, I flew to D.C. to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award from AARP. I stood at the podium in a navy pantsuit Cammy picked out, watching the audience shimmer with silver hair and clenched jaws. I don't need to be remembered for surviving," I told them. "I want to be remembered for showing what happens when you refuse to disappear quietly." When I returned to Vermont, the cabin was quiet again. The snow had melted into wet earth and the lake was thawing around the edges. Cammy and I walked side by side, boots crunching over the slush and patches of stubborn frost. "Do you miss her?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I watched a hawk circle overhead, its wings stretched wide like it owned the sky. "I miss the version I imagined," I finally said. "But the real thing?" Number we stood by the edge of the frozen lake. I reached into my coat and pulled out a single house key, not to the one I'd lost, but to the shelter we'd just opened last month. Cammy looked at it, then at me. "Yours now," I said. "Your name's on the deed too." As we walked back, a breeze kicked up, carrying with it pine and the scent of old memories, but none that hurt.